Now that I've showed you how to go through the Build Your First Blazor app tutorial using the method that's described inside the tutorial, which is using the console app, now I'd like to show you how to do it if you had done it through Visual Studio, which is a little similar to what we've been doing in class. So I'm going to open Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project. Now, you need to find in this list Blazor app, or you can type Blazor and it'll find it for you. Press on Blazor app. Now we want to place it in the same folder that we had before. So I have a folder called STY1001 inside my documents. So I'm just going to put that here. And we'll give it a name. So the last one we called just Blazor app. So here we'll call this Blazor app VS for Visual Studio. And just to keep it simple, I'll put spaces. So Blazor app VS. Again, we're doing the exact same thing. We're just doing it a different way. And press create. And I'm going to choose Blazor server. Now, if I go back to the instructions and I look here, well, it says we need to download the .NET SDK. Well, hopefully by now we have that done. Go to the next step. And we're going to use this command. And we did that. Now, what does it do? .NET new Blazor server. Well, it creates a new Blazor server app. Well, Blazor server app. And then old parameter gives it a name. All right, well, if I go back one step, that's the name. So Blazor server app, create. So us going through this wizard accomplishes the same task as that command. It's just a different way of doing it. Now, once Visual Studio is loaded, we can see that we have all of our files available to us. We also have this play button here. Now, I'm going to shrink this down a little bit so we can see a little bit of the instructions are the same. Now, because we're doing it using Visual Studio, really, we don't even need this console. I'll keep it there just for the sake of having it, but we don't actually need it. Up here, we see we have our new folder. Really, if we look here, look at all the files, go back to the other one, it's pretty much the same. There's a slight little differences, but there's not much difference. The main difference is that there's a solution file. Visual Studio makes solution files, and that's to help keep multiple projects together, but it doesn't really affect what we're doing. So now down here, press continue, and it says run the app. Well, we're using Visual Studio, so instead of running the run command, we'll use the play button. So we'll press this, and then our application will launch, just like before, but in this case, it opened the web browser for us, so we didn't have to go through that step. So we have our web browser open. We can see the app, just like we did before. We can see the counter works. We can go back and forth. Everything's working just as it did before. And we can close that. And when we close it, then we can go back to Visual Studio. We can see that things are still there for us. We notice that the stop and play returned us back to the option where we can play because it recognized the fact that we closed the web browser for us. So it's trying to help us along through the process. So we scroll down and it says we want to look at the contents of the index inside pages. So here we go to pages and we look at index. Now when we look at index, this is what we see. So same thing as the previous way that we went through this tutorial. So it says try the counter. Well, we just tried the counter already. We know it works. And what we want to do is we want to go through and look at the counter code. So we can look at the counter code. And we can see that it's right here. And notice the on click. And notice here we have our method. Now, also notice the coloring. So we have IntelliSense and code color and all this kind of stuff that we didn't have in Notepad previously. So we'll go to the next stage. And now we want to try adding our counter to the home page. Same thing, we go to the index, just as we did before. Counter. There we go. And just like before, you can see we have a counter added to the main screen. We have counter on the other, and neither one of them is persisting the numbers, but that's okay because that's not what it's supposed to do. It's just supposed to make the number go up. And that's it. And then we can move on to the next part. And we'd like to add a little bit of functionality here. We'd like to make it so that we can add a parameter to our counter. So we'll add a parameter. We'll call it public integer increment amount. Get set. And then we'll say equals 10. Oh, equals 1. Ugh. Equals 1. There. So we set the default to 1. And now down here, current counter plus plus, well, it's going to increment it by 1, but we don't want that. We want to increment it by the amount of increment amount. So now we've made that change. And what we can do is we can go over to the index page. We can say, and notice that it found it, equals 10. That's the same change we made last time. So we run this. And notice that when I press run or play, that it automatically saves all my files for me. It gets everything ready. So here, now we have counter, increment by 1. We go over to the home, increment by 10. So we've accomplished the same task as we did before, but this time we did it in Visual Studio. So now I can close Visual Studio. And I have my Blazor app VS. And I'm going to go and I'm going to choose send to compressed. And we have our file here. And this time I'm going to go like this. I'll just copy the name. It's going to be the same. My first Blazor, I'll put VS. There. So now I have the same project accomplished in two different ways. You don't have to do this in both ways. One or the other will suffice. The reason for creating this video is that I wanted to clarify some confusion that some students had, because the tutorial takes you through the process of using the console and it doesn't use Visual Studio, but all of the previous examples that I gave, we used Visual Studio. So now you can see the two different ways that you can accomplish the same task, one with the command line as the tutorial describes, and one as with Visual Studio as I've been describing up until now.